Imagine pushing through the swinging doors of a saloon as the stench of stale tobacco, dried sweat, and cheap whiskey clings to your nose. The piano player holds the last note. Conversations drop to a whisper, and everyone stares at the stranger, making the floor creak under his spurs. That's the scene Hollywood burned into memory. Clean duels, classy ladies, justice drawn from a holster. But what if I told you the real script had little heroism and a whole lot of mud? Saloons in the so-called Wild West looked more like shacks thrown up in a hurry. The booze burned like kerosene, sawdust on the floor soaked up blood and puke, and the out-of-tune piano competed with cattle bellowing outside. Guns rarely showed up in honorable duels. They came out when debt, cheating, or boredom exploded into fights. Flimsy walls hid infections, rats, and a stench that not even the wind could carry away. Between drinks, prostitutes shared tables with gamblers and dust-covered miners. Newspapers from the time described saloons so loud that gamblers' shouting blurred into insults ending in makeshift stabbings. Want to know how all that dust turned into romance? Then stick around. In the next few minutes, we're cracking open travelers' journals, sheriff reports, and medical notes to break down, piece by piece, this sepia-toned legend. But first, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell. That way, you won't miss a single chapter of this journey where we pry up the floorboards of the past to see what really happened when the music stopped and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Imagine arriving at a brand new settlement in the late 19th century and spotting right by the dusty road a patched-up tent with the word "Saloon" hastily painted on it. That was almost always the first business to pop up, thrown together with tarp and old crate boards. As the flow of prospectors and railroad workers picked up, the tarp was soon swapped for pine wood walls. To look more respectable, they'd slap on a false front, tall enough to fool newcomers. Only stubborn towns like Deadwood or Tombstone would years later see saloons with carved balconies, mirrors, and chandeliers that hinted at civilization. Pushing through the bat-wing doors, more for airflow than decoration, a visitor would be hit with thick, heavy air, a mix of sour barley, cheap whiskey, kerosene, and sweat. Flickering oil lamps struggled against the smoke cloud and lit up a floor covered in sawdust, a simple fix for spit, the occasional blood, and whatever spilled from chipped glasses. Every step creaked, every poker chip scratched the silence. Music was a fantasy. What you heard were clipped conversations, dry coughs, and the thwack-thwack of billiard shots. When the wind blew in, it carried dust and the stink of manure, adding to the already dense stew. The sticky gloom clung to your hair, your clothes, your memory. And still, in that rough setting, men who might not live to see the morning found liquid courage, instant grudges, and a fragile sense of belonging, the kind of gold that kept the saloon standing long before the first nail had time to rust. Imagine pushing through the creaky doors of an Old West saloon and being met with laughter, smoke, and the clinking of glasses. A sour-sweet mix of dried sweat, spilled booze, and old wood fills the air, sticking to your tongue like dust. What the eyes don't catch is the danger brewing there, way beyond the sound of gunshots. For folks living on the frontier, taking a bath was an almost epic luxury. Hauling buckets, heating them on a wood stove, and passing the same water from person to person. From the patriarch down to the youngest, until the tub turned into a warm, murky soup. Toothbrush? That was a blade scraping bits of meat from between the molars. When pain throbbed, the barber, or the blacksmith, handled it with pliers, and a swig of whiskey muffled the scream. Outside, things didn't look much better. Towns sprang up with no sewage system. Waste went straight into the packed dirt, creating pestilent streams the wind would carry right back to the saloon doors on muddy boots. Lice, flies, and cockroaches thrived in the cracks, fueling the cycle of infection. Glasses were never really washed, spreading cholera with every round. In stuffy, smoke-filled rooms, tuberculosis spread with a single cough. And when smallpox showed up, a shoulder bump was all it took for the fever to sweep down the whole street. An off-key fiddle carried the night, muffling coughs in the dark. Chips spun on sticky tables, and every bet poured another drink into the same cloudy glass. The roulette wheel spun more than coins. It spun microbes passed along in a handshake. In that boiling pot, the crack of a gunshot almost felt like comfort. The odds of dying from a bullet were lower than falling to the tiny enemy riding the next toast. Imagine pushing through the creaky doors of a dusty saloon and catching, before you even reach the bar, a sharp stench that burns your nose. The danger isn't just in the sawdust soaked with spit or the cloudy glasses. It's hiding inside the bottles glowing under the lamplight. That amber liquid dripping from the corks probably never saw the inside of an oak barrel. What cowboys are drinking is a rough concoction, sarcastically nicknamed coffin varnish, tarantula juice, or just plain rotgut. To quench frontier thirst, saloon owners whipped up makeshift spirits. They'd start with cheap grain alcohol, darken it with burnt sugar, and toss in a wad of chewed tobacco to give it that bitter nicotine bite. Then came splashes of turpentine and a dash of creosote, poisons borrowed from the woodworking trade. The result was a harsh hit that burned going down and, hours later, twisted your gut like it was being eaten from the inside out. Rotgut wasn't a figure of speech, it was a diagnosis. And this wasn't some rare scam. With no laws to keep homemade stills in check, the chemistry of deceit thrived from town to town, riding along with the caravans. Even beer, the go-to for the less daring, offered little comfort. Served warm with no refrigeration, it hit the table flat and rancid. And when that wasn't enough, it got spiked with a pinch of narcotics to fake body and boost its kick. Every sip was a risky bet, but on the long nights of the Old West, few dared stay sober long enough to notice the danger. When people talk about addiction and violence in the Old West, the movies usually show saloons full of epic bar fights, chairs flying, bottles smashing, and a piano player keeping the tune like nothing's happening. But reality followed a different script, dry, quick, and always deadly. Fights rarely involved crowds. They were explosive duels between 2 or 3 men who'd lost money at the tables or let a nasty insult slip. One shot was enough to end the argument, and that danger pushed many towns to make visitors check their guns at the door. That simple rule turned bullets into fists and helped keep the body count down before sunrise. Meanwhile, the real draw of the saloon was the clink of poker chips. Poker tables brought together dealers working hard to protect their honest reputations, because a good name was worth as much as gold. And traveling cheats, ready to skip town the next morning with full pockets and a marked deck hidden in their coat. In the middle of all that noise, another myth born from fiction pops up: the role of women. Saloon girls weren't prostitutes. They were performers hired to sing, dance, and most importantly, talk to lonely travelers, keeping the drinks flowing and the profits up. For many of them, that loud stage was a chance to save up and build a future of their own. Prostitution followed a different path, away from the saloon's lights and filled with dangers that Hollywood rarely talks about. In the Old West, the saloon wasn't the wild, free-for-all Hollywood loves to show. It was a selective club ruled by strict, unwritten codes. Behind the swinging doors, dust-covered cowboys shared the bar with worn-out miners, stone-faced sheriffs, and gunslingers walking the fine line between law and crime. Sometimes the same man on different days. Still, not everyone could just stroll in and order a drink. Respectable women kept their distance. Native Americans and Chinese immigrants were turned away without hesitation. Even army soldiers, symbols of federal authority, were often met with cold shoulders. Anyone stepping over the threshold had to follow a silent protocol. A man's past was off limits. Asking "where you from" could end in gunpowder and lead. Turning down a drink was a serious insult. Accepting one meant sealing a temporary truce. The whiskey served, a mix of cheap alcohol, tobacco, and some say even gunpowder, burned going down and slowly wrecked your gut. Glasses were rarely washed, letting bacteria thrive and spread fever between poker hands, scratchy banjo notes, and shot glasses hitting greasy wood. Hollywood went with shiny chandeliers, smiling piano players, and choreographed duels. But the truth is rougher, and maybe that's what makes it more fascinating. The real saloon shows us a West made up of survivors packed into a tiny world of strict hierarchies, dangerous vices, and a fierce hunger to belong. Looking at that picture, We're invited to question the barriers, seen and unseen, we still build in our own spaces today. And you? What surprises you more? The poison in the glass, the silent illnesses, or the discipline that held it all together? Drop your thoughts in the comments and help keep this conversation alive. Thanks for sticking around. See you in the next chapter of this journey through the